From the director of Poltergeist and the writer of Alien comes a terrifying new film.
I'm getting a very small radar cross-section.
150 miles long?
EGR's confirmed.
Tell them we have an artificial object out here.
In the tail of Halley's Comet, there's something wrong. Something ancient. Something evil.
It's the Cannon Group's first attempt at a major blockbuster film, and of course it involved space vampires. We're still up all night, and this episode, we watched Lifeforce.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to USA Up All Night with me, Rhonda.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Gottfried, the comedian in the cupboard, for USA Up All Night.
In this movie, you'll see two of your favorite stars. Now, if you drink enough beer, you'll start seeing more of your favorite stars.
Stay with me on USA Up All Night.
It may not be Friday or Saturday night, but you've found Still Up All Night, the only podcast that celebrates the films of USA Up All Night. I'm Travis Yates, joined by my co-host and fellow human, Rob Cady. Rob, how is it going?
It's going well, but are you sure I'm not a space vampire?
You might be a humanoid. We're not sure. I'm going to have to test you before the end of the episode. Rob, before we dive into this week's movie, I have a couple shout-outs. One to you for the awesome birthday gift that you gave me last month, the Cannon Film Guide Volume 1. Now, this is an exploration of Cannon's early work from 1980 to 1984. Cannon, of course, is the film company, the Cannon Group, run by two Israeli cousins that churned out just awesome B-movie cult classics like Enter the Ninja, the Death Wish films, Breaking, and Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo. You get the drift. There's a great documentary on the Cannon Group called Electric Boogaloo, The Wild Untold Story of Cannon Films. I highly recommend that if you haven't seen it already. And this book, the Cannon Film Guide, is an awesome companion to that documentary.
Yeah, and I believe they're working on the second volume now.
They are. It's going to cover 85 to 87, and it should be out later this year. And Rob, I have to say, first of all, the cover alone of this book is a work of art. It is
Absolutely.
It is designed to look like a beat-up old VHS movie case with a round orange sticker on it labeled action, like you'd find in the early 80s video stores to identify the movie genre. It's just awesome. And the next shout out goes to the author, Austin Trunick, for reaching out to us after I posted something on our social media page about getting the book for my birthday. He offered to send a signed bookplate sticker for the inside cover of the book. And this thing came, and the sticker itself is awesome. It looks like it's straight out of the 80s, and the package even came with a only a ninja can color a ninja coloring book sheet. So it's amazing. So awesome. So
fantastic.
Austin, thank you for that and for all the work that went into putting in this just radical collection together. And yeah, we can't wait for volume 2, which, like I said, is slated to be released later this year. So Rob, already 2021 is better than 2020.
Big time.
And you can learn all about the book by visiting canonfilmguide.com. So, of course, we had to go with a Cannon film this episode. Unfortunately, it's not from Volume 1 of the film guide, so we'll have to revisit it when Volume 2 comes out and get Austin's take on it. But we're talking about 1985's Lifeforce. So, Rob, initial reaction when we chose this movie?
I think I'd indicated to you it'd been about 25 years since I last visited the movie, and have very different memories of the movie than sitting down and the experience of rewatching it. It felt nowhere near as action-packed as I remember it being. And that all could be the haze of age or the haze of nudity from Matilda May. You know, that could make you forget all kinds of stuff.
I was thinking that you would probably, younger Rob, would just remember that part of the film, which there's just so much of.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that is a memory that sticks out because for a movie like this, that was not a common thing.
So
back then, it was more the teen romance, teen comedy, sex comedy aisle. You didn't often have that with the sort of action horror type stuff.
I saw the cover of this film, and I thought, well, I've surely seen this. I recognized it, and I thought I'd seen every sci-fi film from around this time. But watching this film, I had no recollection of it, so I don't think I saw it. I missed it somehow, and I'll get into that here in a second. So let's talk about the movie. Lifeforce was a production from the Cannon Group and distributed in the U.S. by Cannon and TriStar Pictures, and boy, Rob, it has gotten around since. So Lifeforce, it's one of Cannon's popular releases here. Image Entertainment had the rights to the Laserdisc in '86. MGM had the rights to the UK, US, and Mexico VHS and DVD distribution. MGM eventually got the rights to the Laserdisc in '94, so bad timing there for MGM to get into the Laserdisc game. RCA Columbia had Australia home video rights. Scream Factory released a Blu-ray in 2014. Warner and WGN and USA got in on the TV rights. So it's like Johnny Cash wrote the song for this film. It's been everywhere, man.
Absolutely. But although I have heard some good things about the Blu-ray release.
Yeah, and of course, those special edition releases always come with lots of special features, and I understand there's some revealing interviews with the director in that. So this film is quite a bit different from most Cannon films because Lifeforce had a budget of $25 million. So a big break from the low-budget fodder that Cannon would typically produce around this time. This was their attempt at a blockbuster in the heart of the era, the late 70s and early 80s, where the blockbuster formula was developed. So, kudos to them for taking a swing. But did they connect? Well, it was released in the U.S. in theaters on the weekend of June 23rd, 1985, and it brought in $4.2 million in the opening weekend, and it ended up grossing just $11.6 million. So a box office bust by any standard, but as is the case with most of the films that we celebrate on this podcast, it eventually garnered a cult classic status. So
yes.
One of the reasons for that, Rob, is because there's a familiar name at the helm. Lifeforce is directed by Tobe Hooper, best known as the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the first Poltergeist director. Hooper was named one of the Masters of Horror by Anchor Bay in their 2005 anthology series that celebrated just some of the greats of the horror genre that included the likes of Dario Argento and John Carpenter. So, as we'll discuss, even though he is one of the Masters of Horror, this was kind of Hooper's last big hurrah in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, he came in, after Poltergeist, which garnered him the deal with Cannon, and I think it was like a 3-movie deal he signed with them. But as you said, the swing and a miss on this attempt at the blockbuster, particularly at the time relative to some other more well-known commodities, like the budget they threw at this thing was just gigantic.
Yeah, this was you're right, the first of a 3-picture deal that Hooper had signed with the Cannon Group, and those other 2 films were Invaders from Mars, a remake of the 1953 film, and then a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it was kind of received more as a parody in the way that it had kind of a black comedy to it that wasn't present in the first film. Although Hooper kind of, in some revisionist history, maybe he tried to say, well, there was black comedy in the first one, people just missed it. I don't know about that, but
I do find that I appreciate Texas Chainsaw 2 because of all how wildly different it is from the first one, and it is a goofy, weird movie, and I also find a lot of charm in his remake of Invaders from Mars. It you go in sort of with the premise and the central actor being a young kid, but it's got some pretty gross and scary moments in it.
Yeah, this film is based on the 1976 Colin Wilson novel Space Vampires. So, spoiler alert, that's the plot. But yeah, as you said, just like the big change in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 compared to the first film that he did, he worked with screenwriter Dan O'Bannon on this film to make several changes from the novel, so it wasn't just a carbon copy. Including setting it in present day rather than in the future where it was set in the novel, and then also working in Halley's Comet, which we have to go back and remember 85. Halley's Comet was set to pass Earth in 1986, so I think a brilliant move on Hooper's part. I was just a kid, but I remember the media frenzy over this once-in-a-lifetime event of the comet, so a great tie-in with the movie here of what could happen when the comet passes by. Rob, do you have any Halley's Comet memories?
Oh, just as you said, the sort of frenzy of it and the excitement, just that sort of phenomenon happening generated.
And this was 85, and a comet came in 86. We now have rover helicopters flying around on Mars. It's like today it'd be ho hum. When Halley's Comet comes back in. I think it's slated to come back in in 2061 maybe, but it's going to be like no one's going to care. It's going to pass by, and people are going to be taking selfies, but ignoring the comet behind them flying over.
Or Elon Musk is going to try and land something on it.
Maybe the car that he sent up will be on it already. Who knows? Okay, so screenwriter Dan O'Bannon might not be a household name, but he should be.
He is in this household.
Yes. He attended USC with John Carpenter, and the two paired up to write the sci-fi satire film Dark Star, which was Carpenter's featured directorial debut in 1974. It was actually a college student film that they made that ultimately found theaters. O'Bannon would go on to write Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien. And he would also write and make his directorial debut with 1985's The Return of the Living Dead. In the 90s, he wrote the screenplays for Total Recall and Screamers. O'Bannon has forgotten more about sci-fi, writing sci-fi than I think most people ever learn in a lifetime.
Absolutely. He's got all sorts of alien-related credits as well for shorts and video games and, just the whole, Alien franchise. He's got his fingers in terms of writing pieces of it.
Yeah, when you talk to even cinephiles might say, when you say Alien, what do you think of? And they'll say Ridley Scott. And really, this was O'Bannon's baby.
Well, and I've always found Return of the Living Dead to be one of the greatest zombie films ever made, in my opinion. You're
not alone in that. Yeah, that's a widely accepted opinion, so absolutely. So the film's cinematographer was Alan Hume, who was the director of photography for Return of the Jedi, Octopussy, Supergirl, and A View to a Kill leading up to Lifeforce. That's an amazing resume, Rob. But when you look at his career post-Lifeforce, it starts to look a little like Tobe Hooper's, more TV than film, some lower-budget films. Rob, I'm starting to think that by trying to make a blockbuster, the Cannon Group might have created a curse. Right? You found a great IndieWire article that talked about how this was basically the last big project for Hooper, and it's a shame because, they did everything right. They hired the right people. Henry Mancini was the composer. The music was composed by the London Symphony Orchestra, but it just kind of feels cursed in a way.
Well, all of it. The visual effects are well done, to varying degrees. But like the space stuff. Some of that looks a little weird now, but for the time, it definitely was the upper echelon and held its own against the other space scenes in other movies. So yeah, it's again when you take such a big swing and it is. And I'm sure we'll get into it more. In many ways, a strange movie where you've got the central hero being a U.S. citizen. It's all British cast, and and just that alone seems to often hurt movies that come to the United States. If all the cast is from elsewhere.
Yep. We will talk more about the cast here. Lifeforce debuted on USA Up All Night on March 11th, 1994, as the first film of the evening's trio, and I think that might be why I missed this film. I don't know how I missed it in video stores, but by 1994, I was wrapping up high school, moving on to college, so this is when I started kind of missing out on those home for USA Up All Night Friday and Saturdays. My social calendar was pretty booked by this point, so I missed a lot of the films that aired in this time period. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I missed it. Surprisingly, it would only air just 3 more times between that debut and May of '95. So the Up All Night content director, circa 94, 95, must have been the lone Lifeforce fan on the staff.
Well, too, it is. Well, I guess maybe I thought it was about 2 hours, but maybe it is a little bit shorter than that.
It was longer
Yeah, longer than the traditional movie, in the Up All Night catalog.
So as you referenced, the film was shot in England, and it starred a largely British cast. And again, like you said, I think that had something to do with it being a box office bust. It starred Steve Railsback, who certainly wasn't a household name here or really at any point in his career. He's a classic, that guy from That Thing, with nearly 100 acting credits on his resume. In 1985, he was 75. In 1975, he was probably best known for playing Charles Manson in a TV miniseries, or in the 1980 film The Stuntman that co-starred Peter O'Toole and Barbara Hershey. So a few bigger on the map projects, but really nothing by the time he starred here in Lifeforce.
Well, and then that sort of sticks with him throughout his career. While he's a long career and as a busy individual, nothing really jumps out as being a real hit of any sort.
Right. And then the film is just loaded with British talent that I think many common U.S. audiences in '85 weren't all that familiar with. Peter Firth and Frank Finlay, to be specific. One definite familiar face in Lifeforce, though maybe not necessarily in '85, is Sir Patrick Stewart, Captain.
Yeah, I believe hot off his appearance in Dune as well.
Oh yes, Captain Picard, cutting his teeth 2 years before the Next Generation would launch him into stardom in the U.S. With a short but interesting role here. And then German actress and dancer Matilda May rounds out the cast as our lead vampire and mostly naked space girl, as she's credited in the film. And then Rob, again, that article that you found from IndieWire talks about how they finally settled on May. What did they say?
Yeah.
May was basically the only actress after like 50 screen tests?
Yeah, they had all kinds of issues, predominantly because of the nature of the role. I mean, she had just a handful of lines and was naked for, the entire movie, and, just nobody would sign up for that. And, then even after, like I read one blurb about some German auditions where like the actresses sort of revolted in the audition. So, yeah, they had all kinds of trouble finding a lead actress.
And the issue here was basically because, she's nude most of the film, at least the first part of the film. She's just, walking around or presented to us laying down, just completely naked.
Yeah, and there's some humorous bits about that as well, because I guess at some point Tobe Hooper decided she should be hairless and ordered that to occur, and other people kept pushing back because I believe Matilda May was 18. She was young. And she reappeared completely shaven, and apparently that was a mistake. Mm-hmm. You could see a little too much at that point. So they had to, basically murken her and try and correct that mistake.
She didn't even speak English. She had to phonetically learn the language for the film. So, I thought she was perfect for this role. And again, she doesn't have a lot of lines, mostly just very slow, kind of entrancing, seduction-like. roles to reel in her victims. But she was gorgeous, certainly easy on the eyes, and very memorable from the film for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. She, for what they were going for, where she's not human, and she definitely pulled it off. There was like a non-human element to her that like I said, she pulled it off.
So anything else related to the background of the film, Rob, before we jump into this very unique plot?
No, let's just jump in.
Okay, so as you referenced, the film itself looks great. The budget was wisely spent as far as the production value goes. We've got a title sequence that has us floating over a comet as we get some exposition narration from John Larroquette, which was just kind of odd, but
well, I expected to see him in the film too,
right?
And nope.
And we were never revisited by any other narration, so that was just
Correct,
kind of an odd. We have this omniscient. They really had to explain how this ship had made it all the way out here to the Halley's Comet, and let's bring in John Larroquette to tell us, and then that's it. But we've got a joint U.S.-British research team led by Colonel Tom Carlson, who's played by Steve Railsback, the leading man. And they're getting close to Halley's Comet when they detect a large object in the head of the comet that's like 150 miles wide, I think they said.
Yes. Yeah.
So they decide to take a team and explore it. And Rob, did you notice, so the name of the ship that they're on is the Churchill, so obviously a reference to Winston Churchill. And did you notice the exterior door of the ship when the team came out to explore it? It was shaped like a coffin.
Oh, I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, I'll post that on our social media page, but a really nice little detail by the production team, in a vampire movie that audiences might not have noticed, but I picked up, I saw that right away. I'm like, oh, really good right there. Really good.
Well, I'm not sure if you saw the tidbit of what the ship was modeled after.
No, it looked like a weird flower to me, or like a Venus flytrap.
An artichoke. Of all things.
I love it. See, here we go. Hooper really does insert that black comedy into the film. So maybe we need to revisit Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Maybe it was there. We just all missed it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when they get to the object, they find these giant petrified bats in the first chamber that they stop in. We kind of really fly through all this. It's a lot of exposition and chopped up. They kind of skip the whole... You could almost make a movie just out of this whole sequence alone. They go deeper into this object and they find 3 human bodies, humanoids as they refer to them, completely naked and in these like clear cases and lit up so they can see them very clearly. This is when we first meet Matilda May as the space girl. And then there's 2 male figures that look exactly alike, almost like twins.
Yeah.
They take the bodies back to the shuttle, and then we jump ahead 30 days, and we learn that the entire crew is dead. A fire burned up the whole interior of the shuttle. The only thing left in the ship are these 3 cases with the bodies still in their in perfect condition, and there's also a missing escape pod. So what'd you think of this kind of opening exposition that's kind of set the stage here to get our humanoids back to Earth?
Yeah, strangely enough, I had almost no recollection of this part of the movie. Yeah, I just barely remember any of the... Like, I remember them finding the 3, but didn't really remember all the bats prior to that. And, yeah, like just having the ship burned up. And I did get a real kick out of the life pod, though, where, like, barely one person could fit into it. Like you've got a crew of like 8, and maybe one small crew member is escaping if something goes wrong.
Yeah. So the British space research team examines the bodies and they determine that they're dead. But then I love this little back and forth. One scientist says, "Well, I can't argue what alien death looks like," and then response from another scientist that says, "Well, you'd agree that they're more dead than we are." So,
yeah.
A funny little exchange here. So, you referenced it already. Visually, I'm really impressed at what we've seen so far. The effects are mostly practical, and, you can see Canon doing a great job with their budget. Nothing looks hokey. The movie does feel dated, though, almost like it belongs in the 70s rather than 1985. I don't know if it was the slow pace, maybe the orchestra music that was overlaid like in every scene. It reminded me more of 1971's The Andromeda Strain or 1972's Silent Running, rather than Star Wars or Aliens. So,
well, and I wonder if part of that is the British cast in how seriously they took everything. Like they, are fully on board with this premise. There is no hokiness. They're just dead serious for it all, and I have to think that kind of attributes to it feeling a little bit older than it is.
And I think that's why I like that line so much about the way it was delivered of, well, you'd agree they're more dead than we are. Because, it was such a straight man delivery of such a just ridiculous premise.
Goofy line.
Yeah. Okay, so we start to get some plot development now when our naked girl from space wakes up and seduces a guard only to start sucking the life out of him while kissing him. So he's left in a decayed heap, and the space girl / vampire or vampiress, I'm not sure here the right vernacular, Rob. I don't know how to refer to her. But anyway, she escapes from the facility stark naked. And Colonel Colin Kane, who's played by Peter Firth, and then Dr. Hans Fallada, played by Frank Finlay, and then Dr. Bukovsky, played by Michael Gothard. They tour the facility and try to figure out what to do next. And while they're doing that, our space vampiress claims another victim, a woman in a park. So she's now out wreaking havoc in the public. And Rob, we haven't mentioned Michael Gothard, but his character is pretty central to the film here as one of Britain's kind of space researchers. Gothard would be a British that guy, I guess. He's appeared in all sorts of film and television, probably best known across the pond in the British TV series Arthur of the Britons. And he was also a Bond villain in 1981's For Your Eyes Only. But sadly, he committed suicide in 1992 at the age of 53. So really sad there. But I thought he was great, in this as kind of always the always distraught, always delivering bad news character.
Yeah. Well, he was the only character too to have an interaction with, a vampire and survive. And I kept thinking, waiting for that to kind of come back around, and it never really did.
Yeah, it didn't. When the initial guard was first attacked and killed, then he, ran in and she started to suck the life out of him. But then they were disrupted by guards, and so she took off and he survived. But yeah, we never had that revisited at all. In fact, he died off screen, barely referenced after a very, always in all the, integral scenes in the first half of the film. Then he just kind of fell off the map here.
Yeah. And I have to give a shout out to the special effects of the absorbed, decaying husks of people. That I thought they just looked fantastic. Very, to me, reminded me of Return of the Living Dead, and especially when the one comes back to life when they go to perform the autopsy. Yeah,
so let's talk about that scene. The guard that our space vampire killed comes back to life during the autopsy, and he has vampire powers or whatever these alien powers are himself. He lures one of the doctors over and sucks that doctor's life force out, but before they can restrain him and lock him up. And so he's come back to life, and then now you've got the dead, kind of vampified, decaying doctor. So Dr. Fallada comes up with a theory here, and this is an important one, that every 2 hours the vampire needs someone's life force, otherwise they dry up and die. So hence the petrified bats that we found in this first chamber start to make sense, because they break off part of it and it just turns to dust. So
well, then we learn too how easily this virus is passed. If you get your energy sucked out, you then husk up, but you've got your 2 hour window to absorb someone else, and thereby just continue to spread this.
Yeah, they treat it like a plague. Later, they even reference a 2 hour incubation period. So
yeah. And the one thing though that that totally broke the scene for me is the noise the drained person makes. To me, it just sounded so much like a dying sheep or something.
I kind of liked it. Oh, I kind of liked it just because it was kind of creepy.
It absolutely was creepy. It just, my mind immediately went to what is that sound? It sounds like a natural noise being made by something, but certainly not a human would make. But that was one of the searches I tried to do to find out, what was that noise, and that led me down a rabbit hole of all these different articles, but I couldn't find an answer to that question.
Well, even though this has a blockbuster budget, it is still a canon film, so there is a very good chance that they could have gone to one of the sheep fields of England and said, all right, let's get a sheep giving birth, get some audio of that, and dump it in. I mean, this is a real possibility. Okay, so then they go visit this guard and the doctor 2 hours later, and they confirm their suspicions. They watch him decay, and then in a cool and I thought really fun shot, they watch the doctor that was doing the autopsy come back to life, and then try to escape by running through the kind of cell bars that he was behind, and then just to explode as he crashes through the bars and explodes in dust and dies, and the dust goes all over the guys watching. I thought that was a really cool scene.
That was. Absolutely.
So this sets up a great sequence where Dr. Fallada says ominously, the same thing is going to happen to the girl they found in the park. And he looks at his watch and he says, in about 1 hour.
1 hour,
yes. And so then in a disturbing, I thought, next scene, they've got this petrified naked woman that was attacked in the park by our vampiress strapped to a table with all sorts of, and it's the husk of the girl, naked, and all sorts of medical instruments attached to her. And like clockwork, she wakes up, starts convulsing, making the dead/sheep in labor sounds. And then with no life force available, she just explodes in a cloud of dust.
Dust again, yeah.
What'd you think of that scene?
I thought it, again, shout out to the effects team. She looked great and was really creepy. And I liked the little nod where they had her hooked up to the EKG, it was a flat line, and then it came to life as she, awakened to hopefully feed on someone else's life force. And then the dust explosion. Yeah. It's just fun stuff, yeah.
So just as Kane and Fallada are figuring things out in England, guess who's back? Surprise! It's Colonel Tom Carlson. So it wasn't hard to put this together since, Railsback character is the top billing. So
yes.
The escape pod re-enters Earth's atmosphere, lands in Texas. The tiny little escape pod. It's funny when they open up the door, and it kind of reminded me of Tom Hanks from Castaway. He's all beardy and just looks exhausted, but he's okay. So when he finally debriefs the group back in England, we get a flashback that shows the crew members dying one by one in the same fashion that they are here on Earth. With the life sucked out of them. But it's odd because the three vampires are still in their cases on the ship. And so Carlson doesn't know, what happened or how they died. So kind of a curious flashback there. But once everyone but Carlson are dead, he decides to blow up the ship because he doesn't want to send whatever they picked up from the comet to Earth. So he opens the oxygen tanks on the ship, lights a fire, jumps into the tiny escape pod. The fire burns through the ship, but as we know, it does make it to Earth with the vampires still intact. And I love the kind of aha moments that you get at like the midpoint of a film. And Rob, I'm going to drop a little film school knowledge on us here. So most films have what's known as a midpoint that, not surprising, comes in the middle of the rising action of the film or act 2 of the movie. So the purpose of a midpoint is to freshen up the narrative. Veteran screenwriter Sid Field describes this action as stabbing the narrative with a big hook and then spinning it in a completely different direction. So we don't often see this in our Up All Night films because the screenwriting, it isn't often all that polished. But we're dealing with Dan O'Bannon here. So we do get a very intriguing midpoint event. Dr. Bukowski comes in and tells Kane that they've detected an object leading the head of Halley's Comet and coming towards Earth. And when Kane asks how big it is, he says 150 miles long. Now, in the opening sequence, when the astronauts were in the chamber with the 3 humanoids, I don't know if you noticed it, but you could see hundreds of pods behind them, but they weren't lit up, so you're not sure what was inside, but presumably more vampires, and now all heading towards Earth. So, Rob, did this scene make you perk up a bit? Did you get the aha moment there?
Oh yeah, because it definitely dramatically ups the stakes, that we're dealing with. Like suddenly now, that's your initial thought, like oh Jesus, this ship coming to Earth to release space vampires everywhere.
Yeah, we thought at one point 2 guards, the other 2 male vampires woke up, came out of their case, and then we thought they were blown up by some guards attacking
grenades.
them. Yeah, so they were kind of just forgotten for a while. And so, right now we just think we've got one random vampiress that's out there one by one kind of getting some energy from these people. And then all of a sudden it's, the fate of the Earth now is at stake. So Colonel Carlson is visited by the space vampire in his dreams, and they have a rather racy dream where she's giving him life, and they're kind of having a moment, as they say, and she's naked, he's naked. When he wakes up screaming and saying, "She's in my head, she's in my head," they all hypothesize that if she can connect with Carlson, then he should be able to connect with her, and so they hypnotize him, and he's able to see kind of what she's seeing, and so she's jumped bodies now into a woman named Ellen, and she's looking for victims not to kill, but just to take enough life force to stay alive without getting caught. So she's honed in on a man on the side of the road, and Carlson's able to see the license plate, which allows police to track her down. They track her down to an insane asylum, I guess is what it was called. And the head of the place is Dr. Armstrong, played by Patrick Stewart. So here we go. And, speaking of vampires, Patrick Stewart might be one. I mean, he looked in 1985 like he looks in 2021, right?
100%. That definitely caught my eye as well and made me crack up.
He and Paul Rudd might be 2 actual vampires that just never age. So Kane and Carlson go into Ellen's room, and in a super awkward scene, I thought, Carlson starts getting really rough with this lady, calls her a masochist, and he's able to see into the minds of people who have been possessed by the vampiress and gets a description of who she's jumped into. So before we get to who she's actually jumped into, were you equally disturbed by that scene? It came out of nowhere.
Exactly. It came so out of nowhere. And just the way he acted that scene was so creepy and effective and she wants this type thing. And it was like, wait, what? What's happening right now?
Yeah.
And then for him to say something to Colonel Kane about like, you might want to leave, I'm about to basically get rough with her, and he's like, oh no, I'm into that.
I'm a voyeur.
It's like, whoa, what just happened in this movie?
That was really awkward. So Carlson tells them that describes someone, and he's like, yes, it's another patient down here. It's like some twisted kid killer, but in a twist, she's jumped into Dr. Armstrong. Yes. So Picard is now possessed. They drug him, and Carlson tries to drag the vampiress out. But then he starts screaming, let me go, over and over. She reveals to him, I feel like from this moment on, the film just kind of almost changes. It changes pace completely. She reveals that she, being the vampiress, that they're using the human minds to create shapes and languages and bodies that would appeal to them. So she became this like perfect woman in his image.
Even the bat creatures were a manufacture of this. These weren't really that. They weren't giant bats.
Although, we'll get to that in a little bit. But so a big brouhaha ensues here. The vampire tries to escape. Kane has to stab Dr. Armstrong with 2 doses of pentothal in the neck to stop her. And then in the next scene, it's revealed from Dr. Fallada that only the original 3 vampires can switch bodies, but their victims become vampires too. and he killed one of them with a lead sword just below their hearts. So here's how you kill them, sort of thing.
Yep.
But then, as Kane and Carlson are flying back to London by helicopter with Dr. Anderson's body on board, Dr. Anderson's body just starts to explode. Blood starts pouring out of his head, briefly forming the original female vampire shaped in red, blood. She looks like Carrie, like covered in blood.
Almost like a wax figure. Yeah, it was a weird scene. Yeah, but I appreciated it. It was because at first you're left wondering, well, what is this blood forming? And then it becomes the lead female space vampire.
Yeah, you start to realize that there's certainly a deeper connection here between Carlson and the vampire, and we finally know why. Carlson finally confides in Kane in this helicopter ride that he opened up the case of the ship while everyone was still alive and let her have some of his life force, and then she exchanged some of her life force with him. And I thought this was so cool. He says they must have been living off each other. These three remaining vampires must have been living off each other since they were the only three left when they found them. So it's such a cool and creepy concept of, okay, we're the only three left. So they just kind of back and forth keep exchanging what little energy they have. And then he tells Kane that she went on to kill everyone else on the ship but him, Carlson, and she chose him, but he didn't know for what. So, he feels special. I'm the chosen one. I've got this connection. Kane tries talking sense into him, saying, she's not human. She'll destroy him. And then Carlson, like in a daze, admits, yes, she's destroyed worlds. Rob, the pace has really picked up now. Now it feels like an 80s action movie. What do you think of where we're going off the rails here?
Well, I gotta drop a fun fact before we get too far away from that scene. So back with Patrick Stewart, he and Steve Railsback share a kiss, as the female vampire sort of takes over for a moment, and that was Patrick Stewart's first on-screen kiss.
How about that? With Steve Railsback.
No, Steve Railsback, yeah.
We've got to get
so anyway, I just wanted to share that. But yeah, we're definitely, and I have to admit, up until this point, the parts of the movie definitely felt slow to me. And it was definitely taking its time building to this. And that's one of my memories. I don't remember the movie being slow. I have... in hindsight, my memory told me it was much more action-packed than it actually is, until obviously the latter chunk of the movie. But so at this point, I'm now appreciating that the ball's finally getting rolling.
Yeah, not surprising that from a youthful memory, these are the parts you'll remember, and not that this opening, almost all exposition, sort of slow-moving. Narrative moving leading up to this part. So yeah, that makes sense. So if Patrick Stewart, we need to follow him on Twitter, and if he ever doesn't ask me anything, if he's like waiting in the doctor's office as some celebrities do, we've got to get in on that action and find out what he thought about his first on-screen kiss with Steve Railsback. Okay, so let's see. The guys then get word that London is in shambles, the city is burning, and the vampires are spreading. They think it's a plague. We get this cool shot because they're still in the helicopter heading back to London. Yeah. And, this cool shot that, again, looked pretty good for 1985 of basically London on fire.
We get the awesome movie trope of the blue energy beam, shooting up into space. As we see in all kinds of sci-fi movies.
Yes. The only thing is we've kind of switched gears here because then we get some shots from the streets of London, and they look and act more like zombies.
It's like it suddenly switches gears to a zombie film. Yeah, where people are screaming and running, and they are sort of fast-moving zombies as these vampire people. A lot of them in weird states of decay as well. Just mobbing people and draining their life force. But we also learned too that, and I think I missed something with that big blue ball of energy that's swirling around the city, sucking up life force left and right that they're hoping to transfer back to the ship. And the male vampires are responsible for that ball of energy, but they have to send it through her.
Right. So we find out that she's kind of the key to everything here, which makes sense of why she's been so important to the film. And we learn that the other male vampires are still alive somehow, but they're just off. Yeah, they're every time someone gets infected, the energy goes up to the ship, but it flows through our vampirus first. So, you made a good point about how the zombies act in this, because 28 Days Later largely gets credited with kind of revamping the zombie genre and moving from the slow moving Romero type zombie to the modern zombie that runs and makes them 10 times more frightening than the older. Not that the older zombies aren't frightening, but when you then give them the speed in which the newer zombies move. But really, this Lifeforce never gets any type of credit in that discussion. I guess because it's technically based on space vampires, but I think they should get a little bit of credit.
Planting the idea somewhere.
Yeah. So, we've got almost like now a buddy cop film of sorts with Kane and Carlson, which we'll circle back to that a little later. But this duo here, they're now called to the Citadel to meet with the Prime Minister. And when he walks in, he's all sweaty and distracted. Yeah. So I thought,
which is a key sort of signifying element of having had your life force or somehow being involved with one of the vampires, is you just become sweaty as all get out.
Yeah, it's interesting the way this film it's almost like two separate films in the way the rules work in terms of, first when we take your life force, you become this just dried husk, and then you come back to life, but still the husk. You have to go get somebody else's life force, and then it's shifted to more of a zombie kind of, you got bit, you're going to slowly mutate. And so, interesting here. But I thought it was a bit of a funny scene, but also pretty cool when they basically realize, okay, everyone's at risk here. And they run through the halls to get back to the helicopter, and they see all the soldiers, and they're all sweating and falling over and stuff.
Yeah.
They're told when they get back to the helicopter by the pilot that London is under quarantine. NATO's now in control. They're taken to. We got a war film on our hands now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they dropped essentially we're going to nuke the city, to contain it.
Yeah. They're taken to a staging base outside of London, and they learn they didn't know this until now, that the huge object that was coming from the comet, it's stationed above London. And this is when we get that stream of blue energy that you mentioned. This is the big reveal when they see this for them, taking all the energy that's being taken by the vampires on the ground up to the ship. And Carlson explained how when she exchanged energy, she gave him some of hers, and now she wants it back. And so, I don't know. At this point, though, this cat and mouse between her and Carlson has gotten kind of hokey for me. I mean,
a little bit.
I did love, though, the way this led up to the climax, because now Carlson and Kane have to drive through the zombie-ridden streets of London, because we've moved so far away from the vampire genre now. Carlson's off to confront the vampiress, while Kane is going back to the research center to find Dr. Faladay. There's a hilarious scene where Carlson hears the vampire calling to him and stops his truck, and then like a bunch of zombie/vampire people jump on, and he speeds away, and one of the arms of the guys on the truck rip off, and he's holding the arm and the hand is still moving. And he just kind of holds it up and looks at it as the hand is wiggling.
Yeah, I love the sort of expression on his face as he then chucks it into the back of the truck.
Yeah. Again, great zombie stuff here. That since we've just morphed into a full-on zombie movie now. Okay, so Kane gets to the research center, finds Dr. Faladay, who is sweating now. So of course he's been bitten or life force sucked out, whatever is happening now, but not before he reveals to Kane where the female vampire is. So it's pretty obvious where this is heading. Kane kills Faladay, and he's on his way to help Carlson, but first he has to confront one of the original male vampires in front of this like chapel where she's hiding out and sending all the energy up. When Kane stabs the vampire in the chest, we finally get a look at what the creatures really are, and those giant petrified bats that you talked about that we've referenced from that first chamber, I mean, that's kind of what they are. They're giant bats, which makes sense with vampire lore, Yeah,
or that's a thing they're allowing them to see. Again, it's with her dropping that nugget earlier, what do you believe?
True.
I did like the line before, though, where he makes his appearance and basically says to Colonel Kane, it'd be easier if you just came to me.
Yeah, the vampire, and a really kind of creepy voice too.
Yeah.
I like that. And of course, he's hiding the sword behind his back, and he's like, "Oh, I will." And then he runs up and stabs him. So,
which the whole sword thing was so oddly pulled off too. Like they show Faladay in his office opening like this weird case that has the sword, and going on about and later about just like old vampires, through the heart with lead, and it's like, wait, what? Huh? Where did the sword come from? What?
So yeah, a lot of the research into this film went it went over budget. It was shooting went over time by several weeks, and TriStar Pictures actually ended up editing the final theatrical cut for this, and it was really a mess, basically, just because of, I think, as we see with almost like two different types of movies here within, we just had there's so much happening, and so to try to put all this together, you see a lot of ideas start and then never come to fruition. And that sword was one of the ideas, I think, that okay, here's something that's supposed to be big, but then ends up just being kind of ancillary off to the side.
Well, I believe too, I read that something of like another cut of the movie exists that's like 14 minutes longer.
It's the Snyder cut of Lifeforce.
Yeah, so that's quite a bit of footage.
Mm-hmm. And they probably focus on the things that we said, hey, where'd this come from? That would make sense. Okay, so the final scene here of our climax, Kane runs into the chapel. He finds that Carlson has succumbed to the female vampire, and they're consummating their relationship, so to speak. At this point, we've seen the reveal of the bat, so Carlson's essentially doing it with a big bat, which is, I can't now not think that, even though he's with this beautiful woman.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I found this scene kind of comical, only because she's saying we're almost there, we're almost there. Kane's yelling down because they're kind of in this pit. Kane's yelling down at Carlson. He's got the sword. Carlson puts his hand up just so as he's getting it on with the vampire, and then Kane throws the sword down, and Carlson makes the ultimate sacrifice by shoving the sword through both the vampire and himself. So I didn't see that coming. Kind of a surprise there. All this blue energy that's heading up to the ship turns to red, which is bad. And then she and Carlson, again in kind of a comical, they go shooting up towards the object.
Well, it's too revealed by her that he is one of them.
That he's one of
the space vampires.
Oh, Carlson has turned into.
Yeah. Well, that's why he has this connection with her.
Yeah,
she says you're one of us.
I started to, and I thought she was trying to turn him to that, but then because he still had human in him, he stopped it and killed, made sacrifice his own life so he wouldn't then turn into one of them. Clearly,
or I guess the meaningless sacrifice, because apparently, as they shoot up to space, isn't there a scene where the sword drops out? And the
sword does drop out.
Yeah.
So the sword drops down at Kane's feet, who's left in the street staring up at the sky. The ship turns and just starts heading back to the comet. But you did see all this life force being distributed to the pods in the ship.
Yeah, there you see the crackling of blue energy everywhere.
Right. So, the humans win, minus most of London. But then cue credits with Kane, standing in the street staring up. So the ending certainly set the stage for a sequel. Had this been successful, Rob, what did you think of the way the climax and the film wrapped up?
Yeah, I sort of thought it was a little odd to with no explanation. You get him, making the ultimate sacrifice to skewer the two of them in an attempt to stop this, and then it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter, and we're not going to tell you why it doesn't matter, but there's, it doesn't stop him, and now he's going off with the space vampires because apparently he is one somehow.
I think it's ironic too that a film that kind of teased, Carlson and this beautiful vampire having sex basically throughout the entire movie has such an anticlimactic ending.
Yeah,
to bring it all into a apropos verbiage, I guess.
Yeah, and certainly not a happy ending, which is generally not well received by audiences too.
Right, and like you said, what's happened? Like, did the humans win? What's happening on the ship? It just starts floating away back to the comet, presumably to move on to another world. So should we look out for it? And maybe they're just waiting to make the sequel a year before Halley's Comet comes back in 2061. So you and me both have to make it to 2060 to see the sequel, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. A very unique, so to speak, kind of an interesting take on vampires / zombies. So that's it. We know that the film was a box office flop in 1985, but does have a bit of a cult following now. Rob, let's check in with Rotten Tomatoes to see what others think about the film. What do you think the audience score between 0 and 100 is for Lifeforce?
I think, because it just seems like it's one of those ones that, in hindsight, everyone has a positive opinion of it. So I'm going to go 74%.
Lifeforce has an audience score of 45%.
Oh, wow.
And
I'm bad at this game.
But a tomato meter score, which is critics, of 58%.
Okay.
Which is impressive, just first of all, because it even has a tomato score, because most of our Up All Night films don't even have a tomato meter score. And then, but I will say this, I think most impressive, there are more than 5,000 user reviews on the film.
Whoa.
So even though the score is only 45%, people are watching and weighing in. So here are a few recent reviews. Christopher H. gave it 3.5 stars and writes, incredibly over-the-top twist on the vampire genre about space vampires that can absorb your soul. The film starts off strong, but by the third act, it gets a little ridiculous and silly, and the plot gets completely thrown out the window, but still manages to be entertaining with some cool practical effects. So, Christopher H., you just basically summed up everything we said in the last hour in one short paragraph. So that's a pretty good description of the film.
Yeah,
I would agree with.
It is. It encapsulates it pretty well.
Russell L. goes with 3 stars and writes, better than I thought it would, funny in places it's not supposed to be funny, campy and corny, but with a real element of tension, and sweeping in its scope. I suspect that this movie influenced a number of other films, or maybe it was the other way around. Meh, it passed the time, and I'll turn off bad movies in a heartbeat. So again, Russell L., summing up everything we said, talking about how, 28 days later, didn't get all the credit. Another really, we need to find Christopher H. and Russell L. and bring them on the show because they're right in sync with us.
Well, I did find it, the sort of stark contrast between Steve Railsback's character, and all the British actors. Like, he definitely is, like, relative to how straight they're playing it, he's like wildly unhinged.
Yes.
And for me, that did add a lot of comedy to scenes.
It did.
Even the one really weird scene that we discussed, it's still, as creepy as it was, just his acting and his just insanity was enjoyable.
Yeah. Almost a Nicholson feel there. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in that awkward scene with the gal. And he had this Texas twang that took it even more over the top in comparison to the accents, the British accents of his counterparts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So William S. gives it 5 stars, Rob, and says a remake is required, or maybe a prequel or seasons, please. Okay, I love this idea, William S. I'm right there with you. What do you think, Rob? I think this would make a really cool series today on Netflix, don't you?
Yeah, they did a really good job of sprinkling in just enough of this, much larger story that you could take in so many different directions. But just, the general premise of these sort of life force sucking space vampires is fun, and you can do all kinds of, whether it be a season or a series of movies. Yeah, it's rife for that kind of thing.
Another 5-star review from Sarah L., who succinctly writes, boobs, space vampires, and Patrick Stewart. So there you go.
Yeah, she's right in sync again.
And then finally, Sean O. isn't as positive in saying, got to be one of the worst films I've ever had the misfortune to sit through. I feel like I've wasted a valuable part of my life, but he gave it 4 stars. So I don't know, Sean O. Maybe figure out how Rotten Tomatoes works before being so harsh on movies. So, okay, Rob, we've heard from everybody else. It's time to answer the age-old question we ask at the end of every show. Is Lifeforce worth staying up all night for?
I mean, it certainly checks some of the right boxes when you're staying up all night for one of these movies, because, as we've widely indicated, you've got female nudity abundant throughout, with your lead space vampire. But again, I'm having a tough time with this one because I did feel it dragged quite a bit, and gosh, I'm gonna say no. It's probably not.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is one of the rare episodes where we disagree. I really dug this movie, and I say yes, it is worth staying up all night for. I see how it missed the mark and flopped at the box office. The pacing is a bit slow, especially for the majority of at least the first part of the rising action, especially for an 85 sci-fi film. And the soundtrack was outdated. I think where it really suffered was just a lack of star power. In 1985, I mean, you had the Brat Pack, Michael J. Fox, Harrison Ford, Whoopi Goldberg, Mel Gibson, Sylvester Stallone, Kelly McGillis. I mean, just all these major players that we would go to the theater to see. I mentioned it earlier. This was the formation of the blockbuster formula in this time, and a big element of that is having a well-known star in your vehicle.
Yeah.
So I think if you recast this with a bigger lead and a more well-known supporting cast, I bet you would have gotten butts in the seats in theaters.
Oh, yeah, I think so too. And I think more from the up all night standpoint, I think the slow pacing of the beginning, if you're not going to hook that audience in, I just think people would tune. I would have tuned out despite the nudity.
I was going to say, I think Matilda May and the fun, kind of creepy life force sucking action from those early scenes was enough to keep me. Would have still been enough to keep me into it had I been tuned in for the Up All Night debut of this. But it looked good for its time. It didn't look like your typical B movie. So Cannon, well done on your first and I think one of your only attempts at a blockbuster. You have to think, Rob, what would Cannon look like today had this been a hit?
No kidding. Yeah, it because I think it sort of they certainly not long after this started to really have money issues. So, I think you have to think this was kind of the start of that. Like, how do you come out of that sort of hole?
Yeah, they left their mark in Hollywood for sure, but they left their mark by being anti-Hollywood, essentially. And I think, I think that's why they shot in England, is to avoid the constraints that, filming in LA would have done to them. And boy, they knew how to stretch a dollar and make the most out of it. So, had this been a hit and they continued to make blockbusters, you have to ask not only what would this have meant for Cannon, but what would this have meant for Hollywood if they kind of said, hey, look, we can make blockbusters outside of the Hollywood kind of restraints.
Well, and that's sort of, really their legacy is that they, attempted this and new mold and were like directors that work with them still to this day look back fondly at the chances that the studio was willing to take and their sort of just general mindset. You just wish it would have been a little more successful to help, a paradigm shift and, the movies that could potentially, it's like, heck, the Snyder Cut, and we talked about it the other day. You've got someone given $70 million to help slap something together that really didn't exist in a completed form, and you've got how many indie filmmakers that what would they do with $70 million? I mean, God.
Give them 1% of that, and they could make a movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, our own energy is dwindling here, so it's time to wrap up the episode. Rob, any last thoughts on Lifeforce?
I mean, I still think I look back at this movie favorably, and it does have a lot going for it, and I do enjoy the central premise. So I, despite the not staying up for it, I still enjoy the movie, and it holds a place for the 80s for me.
We want to say thanks again to Austin Trunick for preserving what Cannon contributed to the film world during this time. You can give him a follow on Twitter. He's at Cannon Film Guide. You can find us on Facebook or Twitter at StillUpPodcast. We'll be back next month with a new episode covering an old movie on Still Up All Night.
From the director of Poltergeist, from the special effects creator of Star Trek, the motion picture, Lifeforce. In the blink of an eye, the terror begins.